The war between Ukraine and Russia is locked in the arena of critical clashes between Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia. In line with Kiev's grand offensive plans, the Ukrainians are making a great effort to cut the connection. Roads between the Melitopol, Tokmak and Zaporizhzhia front lines of the Russian troops and the Donetsk region. As a result of Kiev's offensive operation plan, the Russians took action when Orikhiv, one of the most strategic front lines of Zaporizhia, was attacked by Ukrainian forces. Russian Defense Minister Sergey Shoygu reported that a major Ukrainian offensive consisting of 150 armored vehicles and 1,500 tanks was repelled south of Zaporizhia. But the trajectory in this region did not go as Shoygu had reported. For the first time, the Ukrainian army mobilized Western tanks and launched simultaneous offensive operations from the southwest and southeast of Orikhiv. Ukraine's huge tank battalion included numerous German Leopard 2 tanks and US-made M1 Bradley armored vehicles. Simultaneous Ukrainian attacks on Vasilivka, southwest of Orikhiv, and Poloi, southeast of Orikhiv yielded results. Russian forces in both areas were repulsed. Ukrainians managed to gain ground here, but the Russians set out their reinforcements against the defeat in the southern lines of Orikhiv. It was at this point that the special forces of the Ukrainian army were on the scene. The most elite units of the Ukrainian army, known as the White Wolves, were already advancing in the Kamianka-dniprovska direction to support their comrades fighting in Orikhiv, while the 110th Defense Brigade and the 102nd Defense Brigade of the Ukrainian Army were carrying out violent offensive operations in the southeast of Orikhiv. It was claimed that the Russian reinforcements from the Kamianka-dniprovska direction advanced over the city of Zaporizhzhia to support Orikhiv. However, the Kamianka-dniprovska direction where the Russian reinforcements wanted to advance was a risky front line, where the counterattack actions of the Ukrainian army were very intense. Also near this area, Ukraine's White Wolf special forces were waiting in ambush. We think the White Wolves had received intelligence that the Russians would support both the clashes in Orikhiv and other front lines in Zaporizhzhia. Actually, it wasn't that hard to guess because the Ukrainian forces are currently turning the Zaporizhzhia region upside down. The White Wolves also began to advance towards Zaporizhzhia in full force from the Kamianka-dniprovska direction and were positioned in a very nice location on the connection road where the Russian support convoys would pass. The White Wolves camouflaged very well in this area as it's surrounded by woodland. On the other hand, a convoy of military vehicles of the 83rd Brigade of the Russian Air Force took all the risks due to the critical situation in Orikhiv and proceeded on its route towards the Zaporizhzhia region to reach Orikhiv via Zaporizhzhia. In this critical area, the White Wolves, one of the most special units of the Ukrainian army, managed to stop the convoy of the 83rd Brigade of the Russian Air Force near the Zaporizhzhia settlement. After fierce clashes, this Russian convoy was almost destroyed by the Ukrainian special team, the White Wolves. The historical attack operation of the White Wolves was immortalized with unmanned aerial vehicles. In the images reflected on the drone cameras, it was understood that 7 Russian tanks and 15 Russian bunkers and positions were destroyed after the White Wolves successfully completed the operation. It was confirmed that a large number of military equipment was also seized in the destroyed Russian positions. Thanks to this excellent ambush operation, the Russians were not able to carry out military shipments, neither to the city of Orikhiv nor to the front lines in the Zaporizhzhia region. The White Wolves special team of the Ukrainian army managed to completely break the connection of the Russian army between Kamianka-dniprovska and Zaporizhzhia. Therefore, the Russian troops on these Zaporizhzhia front lines face serious problems in terms of military equipment. The Ukrainian armed forces, on the other hand, continued to create wonders in the Zaporizhzhia region using this situation very well. At the same time that the Ukrainian special forces, called the White Wolves, stopped the Russian military convoy in Zaporizhzhia, the Ukrainians were conducting an incredible offensive operation in Storozhev, southwest of Velika Novosilka. As a result of these striking operations, Ukrainian troops succeeded in capturing the city of Storozhev. In fact, the White Wolves played a very important role in the capture of this city, since this special unit deprived the Russian troops against their comrades in Storozhev of military resources. The Ukrainians managed to seize this city easily, but the White Wolves went down in history as the unsung heroes who stood behind the scenes in the operation where they stopped the Russian convoy in Zaporizhzhia. Now the Russians have a much more difficult task. The initial stages of a large-scale offensive operation are the most difficult. The Ukrainians are also fighting without any air superiority, which means more casualties for the reconnaissance elements leading the counterattack, and Kiev has yet to send its best troops into battle. On the other hand, Russian forces launched local counterattacks to reclaim the lost territory, but in most cases, the Ukrainian army was able to hold on to its gains. Russian forces are fighting hard, relying on a combination of minefields, tactical drones, artillery, and strongpoints to repel the advancing Ukrainians. For now, the Russian forces fought according to an ingenious and sound operational plan. However, with the increase in casualties, it is unclear how long the Russian troops on the front will withstand the mechanized attacks of Ukraine. The number of Russian casualties continues to tend to increase compared to the first days of the counteroffensive. In the past 24 hours, the Russian army, the Wagner Group, private military company, and pro-Russian separatist forces have lost about 70 soldiers. Since the Ukrainian army launched its counterattack in Donbass and in the south of Ukraine, Russian forces have lost about 7,000 soldiers and hundreds of heavy weapons systems. In other words, this period corresponds to about a few weeks. Overall, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense reported that as of last day, Ukrainian forces had killed and wounded approximately 216,650 Russian soldiers. In addition, the Ukrainians managed to destroy 314 combat attack bomber and transport aircraft, 300 attack and transport helicopters, 3,935 tanks, 3,766 artillery pieces, and 7,642 other military equipment belonging to the Russian army so far. Currently, Russian losses continue to increase rapidly with the offensive operations of the Ukrainians on the southern front lines. These figures point to a serious problem for the Russian army. No matter how much the Kremlin and especially Russian President Vladimir Putin ignore this problem, the war strategies of the Russian administration proceed in a way that doesn't accept the existence of such a problem. But this is a fact. The troops of the Russian army are running out, and this pushes the Russian Ministry of Defense to take desperate measures. The latest plan to come out of the Kremlin is the official subordination of all private military companies fighting in Ukraine to the Russian army. The Russian administration wants to do this without making it look like a problem. However, Wagner Group financier and leader Yevgeny Prigozhin opposes the plan and refuses to surrender his mercenaries to the Russian army. The aim of Vladimir Putin and Sergey Shoygu here is to use the Wagner forces intensively on the front lines in the Zaporizhzhia region, as well as in Bakhmut. But Wagner's boss realized this game played by the Russian administration. That's why Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Defense Minister Sergey Shoygu have a tough job. If the Ukrainian armed forces completely turns the general situation in the Zaporizhzhia region to their advantage and saves all the settlements in this area, the next move of Kiev will be to completely liberate the front lines in the Donetsk region. Among these front lines, one of the most important places and primary targets is undoubtedly Bakhmut. In summary, Russia's future situation looks rather hopeless when we look at today's Ukraine. So what do you guys think about this? What do you think could be the next Zaporizhzhia region in Kiev's attack plan? The war between Ukraine and Russia began to flare up in the Crimean Peninsula and the Black Sea. Ukraine's pressure on its ultimate goal of Crimea, reducing the effectiveness of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, and efforts to neutralize the logistics network from the Kerch Bridge have intensified in recent days. The final step in a series of attacks came on Wednesday morning when the Russian warship was targeted. A striking attack at dawn on Wednesday morning targeted a Russian Navy spy ship in the Black Sea. Moscow said on Wednesday that a Russian warship had been attacked by Ukraine near the Bosphorus Strait. Russia said on Wednesday that it had repelled Ukraine's attack on one of its warships in Turkish territorial waters with drones. The latest sabotage attempt that Moscow blames on Kiev, one of Vladimir Putin's most modern spy warships, has been attacked by 3 drones in the Black Sea, and shocking new images have emerged. The intense clip broadcast on state television by Russia's defense ministry shows how a high-speed unmanned boat rushes from the water's surface towards Moscow's Ivan Kurz reconnaissance ship. The spy ship immediately began evasive maneuvers and began firing at oncoming unmanned surface ships. The first barrage from Russia's warship missed the unmanned surface vehicles. A suspected Ukrainian sea surface drone was seen dodging fire from its target just before being hit. A Ukrainian sea surface drone rodeo with a Russian warship and its skills drew attention. Operators proved successful in handling the device. The drone exploded instantly when it was hit. However, the drone was hit directly at the crest of a wave and instantly turned into a massive fireball just meters from its target. The Russian Ministry of Defense did not provide information on how much damage Ivan Kurz received in the attack, which it said was carried out by Ukrainian unmanned speedboats in the Black Sea. However, in the images released by Russia, the contact of the surface drones and the Russian warship and how the explosion took place are not clear. It is highly probable that the Russian warship was damaged as a result of this attack. The Kremlin once again witnessed the power of Ukraine. This striking attack shocked the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, and the Kremlin administration because the images were perhaps the clearest frames ever taken at sea. Russian sources suggested that the Ukrainian armed forces were responsible for the attack, after initial reports suggested that the drones were launched from civilian ships. Kiev has yet to comment on the attack. All 3 drones were destroyed and the attack took place about 140 kilometers, 87 miles northeast of the Bosphorus. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, Moscow added that the Russian vessel was tasked with protecting the pipeline infrastructure in Turkey's economic waters. Turkey did not immediately respond to Russia's allegations. Turk Stream carries gas from Russia's Taman Peninsula west along the Black Sea to a point west of the Bosphorus. However, the Blue Stream crosses the eastern Black Sea from north to south and descends 700 kilometers east of the Bosphorus. Kiev did not comment on the attack. The attempt to shoot Ivan Kurz came as a smoke rose from the massive £3 billion Crimean bridge controlled by Russia, raising suspicions that it was also under attack. The Ivan Kurz is a reconnaissance ship equipped with advanced radio and visual sensors, as well as electronic warfare capabilities, and is one of only 2 ships of this type in the Russian Navy. The ship is equipped with various radio reconnaissance and electronic warfare complexes as well as communication systems to ensure fleet management. The ship was designed to monitor anti-missile defense systems, while the exact composition of its equipment is unknown. As a reconnaissance ship, it's equipped with several pedestal machine gun mounts for the 14.5 mm KPV and several man-pads portable air defense systems. There are 120 sailors on board. Ukrainian drones and uncrewed surface ships USVS are putting pressure on Russia's Black Sea forces. Unmanned aerial vehicles have made the northern Black Sea a much high-risk environment for Russia. He also shifted Russian ships further south in the Black Sea after the sinking of Moskva on April 14. In particular, Ukrainian UAV and USV attacks were recorded in Sevastopol in late October 2022 and March 2023. After the first Putin suspended Russia's participation in the grain deal, the UN and Ankara brokered a deal to mitigate the effects of Russia's blockade. Ukrainian food exports, which have become a key tactic in the Black Sea. Some reports claim that the reserve flagship Admiral Grigorovich-class frigate Admiral Makarov was damaged in the October attack. Despite Ukraine's anti-ship missiles seriously restraining Russia in the northern Black Sea, it did not give Ukraine long-range capabilities to hit Moscow's ships in the heart of Sevastopol. For this, Ukraine turned to vehicles such as USVS and UAVs. The use of USVS influenced Russia's decision to divert some of its ships from Sevastopol. The use of uncrewed surface ships and drones became one of the most important developments on the seaside of the Russo-Ukrainian War. Russia is locked in a kind of naval stalemate with Ukraine in this close sea under Turkish control. Geographically speaking, it is now possible for the Russians to tow their ships outside the Sea of Azov, but the Russians can only do it there, not everywhere. The depths will allow the fleet they have in the Black Sea to pass international legislation, and sanctions will not allow them to leave the Black Sea through the Bosphorus. So the Russian Navy found itself in a kind of trap. According to a senior Ukrainian military intelligence official, Russia has shifted most of its Black Sea Fleet warships from its main base in Crimea to safer waters on Russian soil. Ukraine's deputy head of military intelligence, Major General Vadim Skibitsky, said the Kremlin had decided to relocate the ships for fear of missile attacks, but it could not be independently confirmed that the ships of the Black Sea Fleet were relocated. The official primary headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet is located in Sevastopol, the largest city in Crimea and the site of numerous drone strikes in recent weeks. While Ukraine has not admitted responsibility for the drone strikes, Kremlin-appointed Sevastopol Governor Mikhail Rostov-Sev said Kiev was behind the attacks, which reportedly caused a massive fire at an oil depot in the area. According to a translation of Skibitsky comments by online publication Ukrainska Pravda, Russia's Naval High Command has sent most of the Black Sea Fleet ships from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk, Russia. According to Ukrainska Pravda, Skibitsky said, "We see that the Russians are afraid this base and other military installations in Sevastopol are currently tightly guarded. The invaders are equipping their positions to protect against attacks on this infrastructure." Skibitsky noted that the warships were moved to Novorossiysk, about 20 miles from Sevastopol. He described Novorossiysk, located on the eastern coast of the Black Sea in Russia's southern Kuban region, well outside the possible anti-ship missile launch areas in the Ukrainian-controlled area. It is possible that Russian planners predicted that if the Ukrainian offensive allowed positioning closer to Russia's naval stations, the ships could come within range of missiles such as HIMARS. Some experts point out that Putin's possible naval strategy in the Black Sea failed even before the flagship Moscow sank in April 2022. At least 18 ships and boats of the Black Sea Fleet have been sunk or badly damaged since the beginning of the war. This is more than 20% of the pre-war combat power, which consisted of 74 ships and boats. In 1990, the Black Sea Fleet consisted of 800 ships, 274 of which were combat. But then it began to decline sharply at the beginning of the war with Ukraine. The Russian fleet consisted of 275 ships and boats, of which only 58 fought. Thus, there were 5 times fewer warships than in Soviet times. The overall ship composition was reduced by a factor of 3. The Black Sea Fleet, together with patrol boats, had 74 combat units by February 2022. As proof of Ukraine's capacity to attack the Russian Navy, he cited examples such as the Ukrainian offensive that resulted in the sinking of the Black Sea Fleet's flagship Moscow in April 2022. Russia's Black Sea Fleet was, in some respects at least, reduced to a coastal power. This development contains lessons for U.S. planners. However, Moscow's primary purpose of fighting other ships was not well suited to this war, and eliminating its air defense capabilities was not as much of a strategic loss for Russia as it might have been. It meant that Russia's Black Sea Fleet lost its primary air defense platform after Moskva sank. The fleet could no longer move safely along the Ukrainian coast. The sinking of Moskva drew attention to Russia's Black Sea Fleet. According to some experts, this force ultimately failed to exert much influence in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Some analysts argue that Russia's northern fleet lacks the nuclear deterrence and tools to make a difference for Russia. But according to experts, the collapse of Moskva particularly highlighted a threat. Ukraine's dangerous stockpile of anti-ship missiles represented the damage they could inflict not only on Russia's physical Black Sea Fleet, but also on Putin's reputation. In the future, we'll see together how much more damage this missile stock of Ukraine will cause for the Russians. There is a lot of good news from the Zaporizhzhia front. Here, the Russians launched a larger-scale offensive operation in an attempt to breach the Ukrainian defense to the north of Volodymyr to cause a chain reaction and collapse the front line. However, the Russians ran into entrenched Ukrainian tanks along the coal mines that completely defeated them and pushed the Russians all the way back to their initial positions. Last time I told you that the Russians finally lost control over the eastern hamlet, which was essential for developing their offensive operation further. So the Russians were forced to start everything from scratch. I also told you that the Russians started shifting their focus to the west of Volodar, likely in an attempt to enter the town from the last fortified side. The main difference between eastern and western axis of advance is twofold. Firstly, assuming the Russians control the closest positions around Volodya, it is much easier to cross the fields by attacking from the east than from the west. However, once the fields are crossed, it is much easier to enter the town and establish positions in the west than in the east. At the first stage of the offensive operation, the Russians bet that shortening the distance as rapidly as possible was the best course of action. But as it turned out, they underestimated the advantageous position of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians in Volodar just held passive defense, while the Ukrainians in the coal mines launched one counterattack after another, never giving the Russians an opportunity even to start storming the town. Eventually, maintaining positions under constant crossfire took a toll, and the Russians were forced to step back and reconsider their plans. Judging by the actions of the Russians, it looked like the second stage of the offensive operation would largely take place to the west. However, after the Russians advanced in the direction of the industrial area, there are no updates from this region until some reports finally clarified the situation and said that the fields are densely mined, which significantly complicates any advances in the area. But time works against the Russians, which is why they needed to resume their offensive actions somewhere quickly. And as Ukrainian positions in coal mines proved to be the most problematic, they made them the main focus of the second stage of their offensive. The Ukrainians here also have a very formidable defense. They control the hills by maintaining multiple entrenched positions along the tree belts and local peaks. They are controlling the farmland that needs to be taken prior to moving further. And their main base is in the industrial area with mines and recon. On top of that, these battalions of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade have plenty of tanks at their disposal in order to create a breakthrough in this region. The Russians sent one group to imitate an attack on the eastern hamlet, another group to fix Ukrainian troops and not allow them to conduct a flank attack. And for the main axis of advance, the Russians sent their tanks. Recent footage confirmed that Russian tank units were engaged in Ukrainian tank units in the vicinity of coal mines. Unfortunately for the Russians, the attack was rebuffed. A Ukrainian military officer reported that Russian forces failed to establish control over these positions and that high casualties and poor weather are constraining Russian combat effectiveness in the area. In fact, today, the Ukrainian General Staff reported almost record high Russian losses that amounted to 920 killed and 2,240 wounded, Even though the numbers concerned the whole front line when the Russians stopped offensive actions here to regroup 2 days ago, their losses were much lower, 650 killed for that day. The Ukrainian military officer commented on the losses and said that Ukrainian forces eliminated the most experienced Russian formations during the renewed Russian assaults near Volodar, and that the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade of the Pacific Fleet had suffered extremely heavy losses. And this is not surprising because after more than a week of incredibly intense fights, the Russians essentially have no progress. Nonetheless, the Ukrainian military officer also added that Russian forces continue to accumulate more troops in the area and will likely continue the localized offensive to capture Volodya. Russian sources reported that Russian forces are engaging in positional fights. They also reported that the Ukrainians continue using distant mining to prevent the Russians from crossing the fields and that the area has been reinforced by artillery that has already assumed its positions and is firing at the main Russian bridgeheads, which is the northern part of Mykolaiv and Pavlivka. Overall, the Russians failed to breach the Ukrainian defense in the coal mines, which was supposed to undermine the Ukrainian defense in Volodar. The Ukrainians maintain control over all tactically important positions, including the eastern hamlet that they took back last time. Storming Volodar in front once again proved to be a suicide operation. The Russians lost a substantial number of troops during the summer and autumn attempts, and they lost even more during the first week of the full-scale offensive operation.